Hey everybody, welcome back. So you know how the Coach's Corner works. We try to talk about things that you guys care about, and Scott had the idea of talking about digging out of slumps, and I thought, well, that's a great idea because I get that question all the time in Ask Danny's, and then Mike pointed out that he gets that question a lot, and it occurred to me it could be the same guy asking all of us, and if he would just do some work, he would be out of a slump rather than asking us how to get out of a slump. But yeah, there's no question. It's prevalent. It's ongoing. It's one of those things that seems to be in our business, no matter what desk you are, no matter what year, no matter whether it's a recession. I've seen people in slumps during the best possible markets. I've seen people in slumps during horrible markets. But today we have a great way to look at it because I know, Scott, you've actually had some personal experience recently digging out of a slump. Let's define our terms, though, first for the audience. We're talking about an experienced person who had some sustained level of success and then it goes away, right? We're not talking about, because I get this, right? I had one of my junior recruiters come to me and say, boss, I think I'm in a slump. I'm like, oh no. You're not in a slump. You just suck. You've only been here 5 minutes. You have not earned slump status yet, right? So we're talking about a senior person who thinks they have a certain level of mastery and then it goes away.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with why that happens, right? Let's talk about why that happens. And then, Scott, you can talk about how you handle it personally.
Yeah, sure.
Where do you think it comes from? Why does it happen, do you think?
I think there's a difference between normal variance, where you'll flip a coin and it can come up heads 20 times in a row, but it will even out. Then there's the opposite of that. Somebody that starts in the business, oh, wow, I got 5 interviews set up my first week, 2 deals closed. I don't need to work as hard as everybody else. And they don't realize that you have to keep flipping the coin to go through that. But I also think it's input and output. That you're not doing something the right way, or strategically you're going in the wrong direction, or you're not doing enough of it. I think you have to look at all three of those. Are you doing the right actions? Are you going in the right direction? And do you have the right frequency of effort? I think we can kind of distill it in those buckets, so to speak, Danny and Mike.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I think also just my experience of managing recruiters, there's a distinction to be made between sort of outside events beyond your control, right? Even though sometimes it's poor judgment. Like my niche was going south. I didn't want to know about it. I put my head in the sand and now it's a horrible market in my niche. And, we're in a banking crisis and people are asking me, should I stay in banking? And it's like, well, this is not the time to be asking that question. So outside events happening to you, whether they're personal or business wise, that are sort of out of your control that you have to react to, and maybe you react slowly or poorly or in an egocentric way, versus I think the sort of common garden variety slump, which is I stopped doing the things that I was doing when I was successful. Yeah. Which to me, I have all these years of managing, I don't understand it. I never will. I understand when you stop doing things that don't work in your life. Right? This is why I stopped dating. But I don't understand why you go, oh, when I work in this way, when I make this amount of effort and I put together a plan and I execute it with my level of mastery, I get my mortgage paid and enough money to go on vacations and everybody treats me better. I'm going to stop doing that.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the one that amazes me. That the garden variety one. That one I would love to have your thoughts on. I don't understand it. I never will.
Well, I want to hear from Mike. What do you think about this, Mike? What have you seen in your experience in coaching people?
It's a great question. And Scott, I think you nailed the two things. Sometimes it's just an algorithm.
Yeah.
Especially people that really track metrics. $300,000 biller or $400,000 biller renting 3 interviews a week. They do that for 13 weeks and they don't make a placement a whole quarter. It happens. And then they make 5 placements in the next month, but there were no smarter in that 4th month than they were the previous 3 months. And I think that's one of the things with when you track KPIs is like our clients know they're not in a slump, they're in a billing slump. they're due. We've never, with all the recruiters I've managed, with all the clients we've managed, if they hit their numerical targets, and I'm just going to keep it simple now, first time interviews, they always get the billings. It always regresses to them. I mean, we had one client was actually a firm. This was a couple of years ago during a hot economy. The entire company had arranged 98 interviews, and it made 3 placements at the end of March. And they were in a hot seat, and they're like, I want some ideas on how to get out of this. I go, we're not going to waste our time because you're due. We did the math, 10 placements, 12 placements. No, we really want to talk about this. In April, they made 8 or 9 placements. Their old ratio was 8-1. So that ratio is like 30-1. By the end of the year, they had actually lowered it to 6-1. And so that's that. So for those of you who don't track metrics, this is a sanity thing. It's like I'm doing all the things I need to do. But second to your point, Scott, on the other one is it's an erosion. Danny, no one goes from great activity. And let's say they're having 10 conversations a day, 12 conversations a day, getting two or 3 interviews a week, getting a job order, to 3 presentations a day in a week. It's just erosion. Right. And our business, the reward is so far separated from the activity. So any cold call, if I call you, Danny, and you're VP of sales today, and you give me a job order, that's money in the bank probably 90 days from now. Right. And it's probably a placement, and the best case, 60 days from now. So our minds have removed, our subconscious is taught, okay, you did shit today. You still had a nice meal. You have a roof over your head. You still got money in your bank account. And I do it again and again and again until that point comes where like, I don't have any more money. My cash is drying up.
Yeah, that's the one that I always find hard to understand. And I think that's probably, something that is built into you early on. Like took me a long time to understand that one of the great gifts I was given in my life was to be raised in poverty. Because I'm just not capable of it. I get people mad at me here all the time. Like it's happening literally as we speak. We've had 6 killer months. Like it might as well be 2021 all over again. And I'm pushing people really hard right now. And they're like, is there no pleasing this guy? But like Mike, I know how it works. Like we've had huge months. We have a generous comp plan. So there's a lot of people here with some money in the bank. It's summer in Connecticut, and I have seen a drop off in jobs. Well, a drop off in jobs means we will have a bad October unless I kick some ass now. And I've said it, I've been very honest with people. I'm like, don't you understand how this works? It's like today's jobs are November's commission checks. Like, how hard is that to understand? But to your point, Mike, to them, November that's like 100 years of November.
They might not even be alive in November.
Yes, right, exactly. And what you were talking, Mike, I was reminded of Daniel Gilbert, the Harvard professor who wrote that amazing book, Stumbling Upon Happiness. He said that things that are wonderful in their nature wane in their wonderfulness over time, which is we're going to get sick of everything we do. So I understand. I've had a few people say to me in a polite way, you don't remember the grind, dude. Like, I know you did it, but it's been a long time and it's a grind and it's just hard to get excited every single day about plugging in those metrics. I get that. That part, I understand the habituation of it. But when it's your livelihood, when everything depends upon it, it seems to me, I can't help it. To me, I look at it like a deficiency of character if you can't get past it. And I know that's harsh.
I've got a couple of things I could talk about with this. One of them, I think, self-esteem is a big part of this. There's a book that Harv Eker wrote where in it he talks about the financial thermostat. And I grew up poor also. I remember my dad, we're poor, but we're proud. We're always going to be poor. We're always going to be proud. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I want that. But I found that when I started making money, I would self-sabotage to bring it back down to a comfort level. Right. Because I wasn't comfortable with this. I had to fix that. Right. That's one thing. I think also the grind. Here's an example. Years ago when I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, because we live in Richmond now, and there's a lot of evergreen trees. So in the wintertime, you see green everywhere. In Asheville, there's not a lot of deciduous where we lived, and it was just dark, and I would get depressed in the winter times. And one year I said, I'm going to look for color. I'm going to look for color. I'm going to look hard to find the color. And I would look at the trees and I'm like, oh, wow, look at that silvery green. Wow. Look at that lichen. Look at all the brilliance. And I found it, and that saved me. And so I think in the grind, you need to look for the joy in the grind.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done in my desk is that, and one thing, and I actually, I actually did 6 things to get out of the slump I just get out of.
Yeah, Scott, can you talk about the slump you got into? How did you get into it? What did you sense it coming? Did you freak out? Talk about that.
And I think there are slumps, and then there's also no placements, but that's data. You need to make adjustments.
Yes.
And I even came up with the tool, and if anybody wants it, send me a note. I'll send it to you, no charge. It's called the placement autopsy. When people are making placements, they're popping champagne corks. They're not asking questions like, how can we get better? And so there's joy in failure. You just got to look for it. You got to look for that color. And so what I did really, for me, it was just I had a diverse, diffused vision of what I wanted that was not physically possible. For me to have this, and this, like Michael Jordan. I'm going to be a professional basketball player and professional baseball player. How did that work out?
Right.
And so I think number one, and I know we talked about this before, was a vision. Number 2 was having the focus. And for me, it was asking myself questions like, is this activity taking me closer to or further away from my goals? And being honest with that and looking at everything I was involved in. And for example, I quit the National Speakers Association Virginia chapter because I'm not speaking much except to legal groups. So I would look at groups I was a part of, and I'm like, I'm getting out of that. I'm getting out of that. I love you, Rotary. Maybe in a few years, I'm getting out of that. And so just getting my vision, my focus, taking the action, measuring the key performance indicators. What are those things that lead up to a deal? And then also looking at the feedback and then modifying and making adjustments and, tracking things, even going to the point, because I recruit lawyers, guess what they do? They track their time every 15 minutes. They're writing down what they're doing. That's not a bad idea to look at what you're actually doing. I think I know what I'm doing, but what are you actually doing? And I think recovery and any type of recovery begins with self-honesty and being completely honest with yourself. And how are you really doing? And are you really doing what you should be doing?
Well, Scott, when you say recovery too, I know you meant it in the intrinsic sense of recovering from a slump, but there's also, as you're talking, you're recovering from this energy deficiency you had. That's the stuff too. It's like when you cut out the Rotary and you cut out the speaking, you just bought yourself something really valuable, which is the time, right? And
white space in my head.
What are you going to do with that energy? That energy now should come back, and you can do nothing with it, and that won't help your slump. Or you can put it into your desk, and then the slump goes away.
Exactly. And now that I'm doing one thing instead of 5 things, I have more time to sit and think about this. Well, how can I grow closer to this client? How can I do this? What if I did this? What if I did it this way? Oh, wow, that's really working.
Right.
And so I think just being honest, I'm not one of these people that can run 3 different enterprises with no nexus in between them. I'm just not wired that way. And so I think that's what I did. And I hope that gives hope and encouragement to people and kind of a template, so to speak.
What was the time frame, Scott, like when you say slump, I'm assuming you mean buildings were down. How long before you were able to recover? What's a reasonable period of time for people to say, I should be out of this by now? Because I get that question a lot. Like, how long should a slump last? Well, I'm like, 5 minutes would be nice. But and then you get people saying, well, it's been 10 months since I've made a placement. Okay, that's not a slump. That is a cadaver, right? There's a difference. What's a reasonable period of time for you to get out of it?
I think if you start doing work, you'll see life within. If you measure certain things, like, okay, I'm going to measure just the inputs. I'm not worried about the outputs. I'm just focusing on the inputs. And that builds confidence. Wow, okay, look, I can be on the phone this much. I can talk to these people. I can do the work. That builds confidence. But I think within 90 days, if you do certain things, you'll start seeing, and in my niche, it'll take 7 months to close placement, and that's normal. And
Right.
so I'd say within 90 days, when you start a traditional mid-level contingency search or retained search a lot quicker because you get money up front, which means more commitment from the clients and more hope to the deal. But I think about 90 days. If somebody really hits it and kills it and they are honest with themselves, and just to kind of revise, what's the vision, the focus, the action, measuring it, the feedback, modifying and adjusting. If they do those 6 things, I think within 90 days, they'll be able
I
to
think that's
find.
fair. And the reason why I wanted a number from you guys, because when I deal with slumps, I always tell people, we got to have clarity of goal, right? We got to make a placement, usually if you're in a slump by a certain time. We got to have some sort of accountability, and that's where, the KPIs that Mike's championed so much come into play. But I also throw in a deadline. Like, just because we're just done with the Olympics, it's like, Noah Lyles will run a 9.400 because he knows he's got to run 100 yards. If you just said to Noah Lyles, run as fast as you can, as long as you can, and I'll get back to you. That third 100 yards is not going to be 9.4. And this is, I think, one of the problems with slumps is I've heard people say to me, it never ends. Like, it never ends. Like, you make all these analogies to sports, but it's not like sports because it never ends. But so it's perfectly fine. What I do with my people is I say, let's have clarity of goal. Let's have accountability, which is me. And then let's have a deadline. Let's build 25 grand by, November 1st, and then take a long weekend. Or then you don't have to make BD calls for 2 weeks. Or let's give ourselves some sort of recognition and reward for the deadline. And then let's set another short-term goal, because I'm convinced recruiters are incapable of long-term goals. When I have a year-long prize, like we're going to take the group to the Bahamas, everybody's like, yay. And there's no way in the world they're thinking about that until like 2 months before, right? It's meaningless to them. Recruiters need short-term goals. They can't think in long terms.
So on the deadline, one of the things I've done a lot with, and it succeeds, is generally if you're in the slump, that's activity-based. That's that erosion. That's the self-fulfilling prophecy death loop, right? I'm not talking to anybody, so then I say nobody's hiring. I say nobody picks up the phone anymore, right? Well, you made 3 attempts, right? So I guess back to you were correct. One of the things I pulled this number out of my butt a number of years ago when people were in slumps, and we do it with our clients. 90 days is exactly what I recommend. And not even the deadline, I make it 5 sprints a week, meaning Monday through Friday, 15 conversations a day.
Yeah.
We're in a slump, and I'll be like, we're recording this at the end of August, September, October, November. Thanksgiving, you're going to be out of this. I can't predict even a placement because the randomness of this business, you might have 1, you might have 2, you might have 3, but you're going to be happy in a week, much happier in a week, but you're going to be out of the shit in 90 days if you follow this formula. And that way, what they've told me is in that slump mode, they can sprint. And I'm like, I hit 15 today. I had a good day. I had a turn down. I didn't get a job order. I didn't get a send out. I hit 15. I had a good day. And as you guys know, we've all done it. You get back on the phone, you start engaging with people, and it's fun again. What sucks, this is water torture when you sit there and talk to 4 people a day.
Yes.
One in the morning, one right before lunch, one after lunch. What are you doing? And for those of you who think, well, Mike, to your point, Danny, we're dinosaurs because we're from the 90s recruiting. We do this with our clients. I think I mentioned this in another podcast. We do power hours once a month, and they have to come with a prepared list. And in 45 minutes, our average for the last 2 years has been about 22 attempts, 3.9 conversations in 45 minutes. That means 5 an hour. So when you're focused, you can talk to 5 people in an hour.
Yeah.
Right.
Ian, I promise you, if you're listening to this and you just do this for a week, 75 conversations in a week, marketing, recruiting combined. I don't care what if you need job orders, it's going to be mostly marketing. And tell me you didn't have more fun that week than you've had in months.
Yeah. One thing you said, Mike, if I could say something, you talked about 5 conversations per hour. There's a concept that I brought to the industry years ago called the telephone discipline tool, where you want to break your day. If you think of it, your year is made up of a series of well-executed hours. So if we go to that unit of time, an hour, if we're making widgets, how many widgets per hour are we making? 4 widgets per hour. If we want a 25% increase to our total annual widget production, we're going to make 1 more widget per hour. So I actually would train recruiters to measure your hourly targets. What is your target? So then what you're doing, you're setting an hourly target every hour. How many people can I talk to in the next 60 minutes? And what that does, it's almost like a Zen approach, because the only thing that counts in life is what's happening right now. Right. It brings that focus to the now, to the present. It doesn't matter about, okay, the deal that's going to close, the next client I have to talk to tomorrow, that's not even there yet. Tomorrow is just a promise. Yesterday, it's just a memory. Today, right now. And by focusing what you said, Mike, on that hourly target, wow, okay, let's see if I can reach 1 more person this hour than I did the previous hour. And then finding that joy and that fulfillment, that rush, the chemical factory in our head translates into emotion, which translates into better performance.
And I think it's harder now, guys. I mean, I just got to give you so much credit because you're there by yourself. Nobody's going to kick your butt. If you want to stay in a slump, you can stay in a slump, and there's nobody going to fire you, right? But I think it's harder now because it's easier to hide. Whether you're a remote recruiter or even if you're not a remote recruiter. I mean, I have a combination. We have what we call a discretionary hybrid model here. So people are in a few days a week, but they're home a lot of it. And we have remote offices all over the country. But if I walk through and somebody's on a Zoom call or somebody's tapping away on a computer, I don't know that in their minds, they're scared to death. They're in this slump. They're in denial. And they're not starting, right? So it's so much easier to hide now. So for the person who's really, really suffering, the hardest thing is starting, right? And I don't know how you guys feel, but I'm kind of a contrarian here because what I hear, and I'm not talking about you guys, but I've heard other trainers say to a person in a slump, you know what, start easy. Start, recruiting in the morning rather than making your BD calls because that's less rejection. Start, call your mother, call your wife, call someone you placed 5 years ago because they love you and start with that. I'm the complete opposite. I believe in cryotherapy, man. Like go minus 200 degrees for 4 minutes and show that you can survive. Like there's a guy in my office, Steve Rosen, who I love to death. And he wasn't in a slump, but he's the opposite. He's just like, I can call anybody. And last week, after we had a sort of motivating session for the company, he called Mark Cuban. He was like, I bet nobody cold calls Mark Cuban. I'm going to cold call Mark Cuban. And of course it didn't get through, but there was this energy in the office of, oh my God, Rosen's calling Mark Cuban. What if he gets him on the phone? It's like, he's like, he gets him on the phone. But let me tell you something. When you try to get Mark Cuban on the phone, calling some CFO of some manufacturing company ain't no big deal. So I believe that you have to start, and I'm here, you guys. You got to start small. I tell people all the time in the gym, it's like I see people who haven't worked out in 10 years do 100 sit-ups after never having done a sit-up. Okay, well, tomorrow morning, your stomach's going to hurt so much that you're going to say, I can't do that again for a week. So you did 100 sit-ups in a week. But let me tell you something. If you did 10 sit-ups a day, that's less. That's 70 sit-ups versus 100. But now 10 doesn't hurt. So next week you'll do 12. And next week you'll do 15. And guess what? Within a couple of months, you'll be doing 100 sit-ups 4 times a week. And you might actually have some abs, right? So I think you do have to start small. But I say start small and cold, right? Because you have to know it's not, no one's going to hurt you. There's no damage there's no price to be paid. Someone hangs up on you, big deal. You have to leave a voicemail, big deal. I think it's easier to hide, but at the same time, the rejection level is less. Because, when I made 100 calls a day, I got hung up on 10 times. Yeah. These guys don't get 10 live connects in a week. So how much rejection really is there?
I like what Gary Miller said. You guys know Gary, Miller Resource Group, 47 years in the industry. Yeah. He was on my podcast a few months ago, and I actually he hired me to speak at his annual retreat last week. So he and I got to have dinner last week, just the two of us. And on the podcast, he was talking about whenever he would get slow, he'd say, okay, I'm going to make 100 connects. I mean, just where you make this overwhelming commitment to do all this work, but then 5 or 6 calls into it, oh, you're busy again, and you just starting and doing something, just make that commitment. But you'd be amazed at how soon it can turn when you start getting busy, when you put the volume in early on,
Yeah. It doesn't take as long as people think,
Yeah.
but it's the starting that's hard.
Yeah.
And then I also think it's worth talking about the perennial person. Now we're talking about people that have been at it 15, 20, 25 years, and they've heard a lot of this before. And it's interesting because if you go to YouTube and you say I'm in a slump, I guarantee the first person that's going to come up is Simon Sinek, because he's a very engaging speaker with a lot of riz, but he's got one basic idea, which is the reason why you're in a slump is because you don't know your why. You don't know why you're doing this. And on the surface, it sounds like 100% true. Like if you were connected to your why all the time, you'd be able to do the what and you'd figure out the how, right? So it's one of those things that seems absolutely rational and it seems like a quick answer. But for the 20-year veteran, the problem is your why changes. Mm-hmm. Like I said, what if I said, well, the reason I'm in it is because I was raised in poverty like Scott was, so I got to make money. Okay, and I'm not saying this to brag, but I haven't had to do this for groceries for 20 years. So what's my why now? Your why changes. And what I think happens is people are with their why 1.0 their whole lives. And it's gone.
We do a lot of work with that because you're absolutely right. It's that, Colin's good is the enemy of great, right? They have their house. They have nice vacations. They've got money in their self-employed pension or 401k, depending on what their situation is. They want for nothing. Right. They want for nothing. And in certain situations, an owner might not even, might be in their 40s or 50s and not have to work again because they've done so well. And so it's like, I'm here, I'm at the end. What do I do? And a question, Dan Sullivan, a strategic coach, this is one of the best questions I've ever been asked. We'll give it I paid $25,000 on this question. I'm going to give it away for free. Is what has to be true about your role that you'd never want to retire from it? Yeah. And what happens is you come up with a bunch of things and your subconscious starts going unrealistic. No, they're all realistic. Meaning, you know what? I'm sick and tired of doing the cold sourcing of candidates. I mean, I got there in 8 years. I don't know. I can't see how people can do that for 30. But everyone's different. I'd want to take more long weekends. I'd want to take a vacation, a week, a month of vacation. Those are all realistic. Now setting up my business or setting up my desk to do that becomes a new challenge.
Right.
Because it's probably, if you're in that mode that we're just describing, financially, an incremental of dollar of commission check doesn't have what it used to have, but more freedom of doing the role you want to play. What is the role you want to play? Yes. Is where I think some people can find that why.
You know what? That's great. I love that, Mike. And I can see a recruiter can take that. So for example, I'm just, let's say somebody's working I'm just doing mid-level construction, project managers, superintendents, project engineers. It's the same thing over and over again. What if you became a specialist in recruiting just business developers for general contractors, large subcontractors, architectural and engineering firms? What if you were able to develop a sub niche and you were number one in the world in that category? That's what I did with my legal recruiting practice. Instead of all these things, one change I made was I'm going to specialize, not just intellectual property, regulatory, litigation. I was like, no, corporate finance and anything that touches private equity, I'm there. I went deep. And then with my client relationships, another change I made was, because I've met with 70 firms, I've got placement agreements with 80 of them. I've got about 24 relationships with firms where I've made placements. Instead of spinning plates for all of them, I'm only working with 2 at a time on long-term retainers. I hadn't done a long-term retainer with a client since 2013. I thought, maybe I don't want to do that again. But I thought, what if I could get closer to the firms? And I went through and I did research to show mathematically, you suck in this area. Look at the data. I have a solution. corporate, finance, private equity, recruiting. And I think that breathed life into the grind and that's what I'd recommend to anybody listening. You've been in it forever. It's the same thing over and over again. What if you were able to specialize in something and become known as that preeminent, credentialed expert in that niche? You're going to get people call you back a lot more quickly when you say, I know you get calls from other headhunters, but one thing that's different about me is that I'm a specialist in only recruiting business developers for building contractors, and that's it. And I read your profile, and I think you could solve a significant problem for a client that I'm very close to. Wow, you're going to get a lot more response that way. Then the goal could be, how can I build out my thought leadership? How can I write books, write articles, sit on panels, speak at conferences, and become known? And then, wow, that's a whole new journey. I thought this was a phone business. It is, but you know what? The phone calls are a lot easier when they've already heard your name, and they're a lot easier when they come to you. And so I think for anybody else that's in a slump, maybe you could find a way to go deep in your niche and broad in your name, build a name in your niche. Anyway, so.
And Scott, I think you're touching on something really important. And again, we have to make a distinction between the Gen Z person who's been doing this 3 or 4 years and built 400,000 3 years in a row, and is 26 years old and comes in my office and says, I just want to try something else. And, I want to say to him, oh no, you're a great recruiter. You don't go on to bigger and better things. You go on to smaller and worse things. No, you can't. But the Gen Z person is going to make several job changes in 10 years. And what I tell those people is, take it from me, having a whole lot of money will give you the ability to do those things. And the confidence and the market mastery and the salesmanship will serve you well. You're not good enough yet, but go do something else. And I've resigned myself to, I've had several people in their mid to late 20s who did very well, who just said, I want to try something else. Good for you. You should do that. But for the person who is that 15, 20-year vet, the most common one, who says, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I don't think I want to do this anymore. I always start with, I'm all in. Look, I think you should quit today. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And then they're stuck for an answer. And so what you're pointing out, Scott, because there is a certain hypocrisy to all three of us, right? Like I've had people intimate it to me. They're like, well, you didn't just run your desk. You bought your firm and you started a speaking business and you write. True. Fair enough. Yeah. I would have been incapable of doing nothing but running my desk. But, my first book was a work of fiction that featured a headhunter. I decided to be a speaker within the recruiting business because I knew my firm would be a think tank that would feed the training. And I wanted to be a master in the world that I was in. So you don't have to necessarily leave it, but as Scott says, you have to stay adjacent to it and say, maybe I should go into retainer. Maybe I should open a contract division. Maybe I should just place presidents. Maybe I should become a thought leader within my niche. Maybe I should go into internal recruiting. I don't know. Maybe you should be a corporate talent act person. That's fine too. But I rarely see success with people who throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, I'm going to go be a stand-up comic. And then 2 years later, they're back in the business. And we all love Richie Harris, and Richie nailed it years ago. When he was in a slump, he fought his way out, and he just said, look, I knew that I could leave the business, but the business would never leave me. And if you're really meant to be a recruiter, there is a rush to the power of talking to V and C level people all the time, and the impact you're having on people's lives on the candidate side. Go try selling something else and see if you make as much impact, feel as good about it, with frankly as little work as we have to put in. It's hard to remember all that when you're in the middle of a slump and it just feels like torture every time.
When I was in the business 5 or 6 years, Danny, and I was in a slump, and I was in a pity party, and it was like the middle of July, 100 degrees and humid outside, and I'm drinking my coffee in my 71-degree air-conditioned office. And my brother is a tradesman, so he does HVAC, like large air conditioning units on roofs with black asphalt absorbing the heat. And I go, you know what? He's working his ass off today. And I'm sitting here, I'm going, oh, maybe I should microwave my coffee.
Yeah.
Right. I got to pick up the phone to like what you said earlier, Danny, and have somebody go, no, hey, thanks for calling. Like, we don't need anybody right now. Why don't you call me back in September?
Right.
And that was, I remember laughing at myself, and sometimes, like you said, you put things in context,
Yes.
right? Oh, the grind, the gruel. All right. You're in an office with unlimited coffee or whatever your tea or whatever you drink. You get to set your own pace. You get to talk to other human beings. And, our metric right now is 12 out of 13. If you're doing cold marketing, are going to tell you they're not hiring now. And most of those 12 no's are rather pleasant. Hey, we just hired somebody in July, Mike. Check back in October. We're going to be looking for this and this. I think hangups are less now than they
Absolutely.
No question. I think, so it's all context. And I think, to your point, Danny, well, you did all this. You have team leaders in your office. You can grow a team. You want to be a speaker? There's no one better in the industry to tell somebody how to become a speaker at NAPS. I'm sure you would support them. Keep your metrics. Right. And also, if you want to go on a speaking circuit or you want to do some coaching through the firm, I'm getting referrals all the time. I don't have the bandwidth to coach.
Absolutely.
If you want that route, it's available here at our firm.
Well, the other thing I try to tell senior people is, and it's hard to keep this in mind when you're in a slump, I get it, but it is probably the best business ever for scaling down the end of a career. Like, nothing makes me sadder than when I get off a plane in Florida and I get an Uber driver and he's 75 years old and he thought he had enough money to retire, but found that he really needs more money. And so here he is driving me around. People always underestimate how much money they'll need in retirement, and people's retirements now are lasting 20, 30, 40 years, right? So what a great business. I have several of my senior partners are like, you know what? One guy that is going to do 900 grand this year. His goal in 5 years when his kids are grown and they're out of college, he'll kick it back to 3 days a week and do 450 grand. And then he'll be happy to be an advisor to the new people, and he'll go to some island and he'll build 300 for a couple more years after that. And that's fine with me. But what's not fine is the time right now where you go from 900 to 0 and you start whining and everybody, sorry for you. That's unacceptable. And I mean, the only thing I tell people get really into slumps is, I get it. I get the pain. I know you think I don't remember it. I remember it very well. And I manage people who are in them all the time. One of the most glorious things I witness is the people that make the comeback from the slump. What an amazing change in a person, the way they carry themselves, what they've learned about themselves. And the next time it happens, they're not as afraid. So, you got to fight out of a slump just to show you can fight out of a slump. Because whether it's a work slump or a personal slump, you're going to get some bad news, and you got to figure out what kind of resiliency chops you have. That's called life, my friend, and it's coming at you whether you like it or not.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think once you go through that once or twice, you have confidence, right? Oh, I've been through this. I went early in my career. I think I went 56 interviews between placements, first-time interviews, not first.
Oh, you poor guy! Wow.
People were keeping sharp objects away from me.
Yeah.
But I'm sitting there, and my ratio at the time was like 9-1. And I go, I'm due for like 6 deals. I like every day, just keep arranging interviews. You're due for 6 deals. And it was like 57, 58, 60, 62. Like they can't. And that's what always happens in that algorithm-based slump is they come in a bunch. Right. And then what happens though is this triggers the second slump, because now I'm God, right? Now I've got $200,000 spilled in 3 months. And then all the things I did to get out of the slump, I stopped doing.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's the Kipling poem, right? The successful life is the person who knows that both success and failure are imposters, right? They're both imposters, right? It's simple as that. All right, guys, I appreciate your time. I think the people that are in slumps just need to know that people feel it, understand it, and empathize with them. And obviously, folks, anybody that wants to reach out to us individually for help with the slumps, we're happy to do it, and we get it, and we feel for you. Fight your way out. All right, guys. Till next time. Thank you.
See everybody.
Guys,
Thank you.
Talk to you.
Great job.